Alright, Wheel of Time, episode 7. My first reaction when watching it was... what? My second reaction was... My third reaction as well, this right here. Alright, let's talk about it. Suspension of disbelief obviously is a thing in fantasy fiction. In a world filled with magic and mythical creatures and heroic deeds and this and that and the other, you're just gonna have to ignore certain things and just be like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever. Everybody has different standards for what strains or breaks their suspension of disbelief. To some, the suspension of disbelief in the scene might be strained simply by heavily pregnant woman fights. To others, the suspension of disbelief is simply strained by woman fights men. Regardless of how you feel about that, lore-wise, a mythical fate-like force intervenes in this situation. So, what strains my suspension of disbelief here? Dual spears. And not just, okay, I've lost my shield in this battle, I'm just gonna pick up another spear and use that because it's better than nothing. There's this almost like display plate that holds the spears. So if you're already carrying a rigid, flat object on your back, why is it not a shield? You could even come up with some weird contraption that you can clip the spears onto the shield with, or who knows what. But shields on a battlefield, unless you're walking around in a full suit of plate armor, which nobody here is, kind of important, you know, just a little bit important. We've seen a number of things being thrown here, and there are clearly arrows. So why do you not have a shield? Why do you carry this display thingy on your back? You don't need extra spears, you need extra protection. Personally, I'm not even a fan of using a spear in one hand together with a shield for reasons I'm going to elaborate on later, even though it was perfectly common on the battlefield in real-life history. But 2 spears without a shield is foolhardy. At first I thought throwing spears, right? Why else would you be carrying this many? Maybe, but if it's intended as just throwing spears, then she doesn't have anything else, any main weapon, which is weird, so I can only assume triple wielding was the plan, or something, I don't know. This is just what you get for wearing a cloak. In a cold environment where it would very much benefit you. But hey, maybe you should have some kind of quick detachment, like Batman has for his cape, so that you can get rid of it before a fight. The armor that these guys are wearing is a little bit questionable. Apparently it's just nothing but leather belts or something. It looks slightly inspired by a Lorica segmentata maybe, except that it's all leather, and there seems to be a pretty significant gap here in the center, so you can easily stab them there. I suppose if you want to sacrifice protection for mobility, then okay, but it's a bit of an odd choice either way. What's worse is it's got this sort of trope that makes me want to pour bleach into my eyeballs every time I see it, which is armor is apparently just an accessory for fashion. It doesn't do anything. I mean, a thrown dagger just goes straight through the plate. You might want to wear something other than spray-painted paper mache on the battlefield if you value your skin. Just saying. Then these 2 dudes throw axes at her, which she parries. You know, cool scene. Doesn't strain suspension of disbelief too much. You know, if you're fast and have got good timing, then it's plausible. This is it's not quite how fighting works in real life, but okay, what I will definitely give them credit for is this right here. So she notices this other guy approaching and realizes she needs to do something about that right away. So she jabs at those guys to just throw him off for a moment, just keep him busy. And then she immediately turns around to deal with this guy, and then she runs past him to, gather them all in one place. So she can face them all instead of being surrounded. I mean, she still ends up surrounded for the most part, but at least, she's trying to mitigate that. And what I like here is that she points each spear at the two who are a threat right now, because the dude in front of her right at this moment isn't a threat. He's on the ground, is trying to get back up. He's not the threat, the other two are. So that's pretty cool. And then we've got this whole thing here where, as far as hero versus multiple opponents tropes are concerned, this is actually pretty good because they're doing things. A lot of the time, this only works because they just stand around twirling or doing absolutely nothing. They aren't as aggressive and coordinated as they should be. If they really work together and push the offense and utilize their advantage of outnumbering her this much, they should easily be able to overwhelm her. I mean, any kind of situation like this, multiple opponents in a real fight is a huge problem. Even just 2 is hard enough. 3 is extremely difficult, almost impossible. But it is fantasy. We want the heroic fantasy. We want to see a badass hero take on multiple enemies, sometimes small armies, which gets a little bit silly. But this doesn't strain suspension of disbelief beyond reason by any means, in my opinion. This is it looks cool, but it really makes no sense. I mean, if you did this, pinch someone's arm between 2 spears, and then wrench her around like that, that's not what would happen. What would happen is this. This is pretty good. Blocking with both spears to make sure you got it, and then using one of them to wind and get the sword out of the way. Basically, at this point, controlling with the left spear, this is where you need to stab with the right spear. Either way, things are happening that don't take you too much out of the experience, other than maybe the lack of tactical intelligence that these 2 dudes have. So she bonks this guy in the face with a spear, who was then stunned for half an hour while dealing with the other. Slashes him up. Meanwhile, the other guy takes a lot of time to recover, which is not really something you can afford in a battlefield environment. But hey, they need to allow for this in one way or another, because otherwise it would just be too much of a disadvantage. Then he tries to slash at her. She does a matrix dodge, and then we've got some grappling going on here. This is a little bit strange. Total nitpick, but kind of funny to see. If you look at this right here, the spear is pressed against his neck, so on the outside, on the back. In other words, she should be pressing. If she wants to take him down, she needs to be pressing to her right, pushing down on him. Instead, she goes to the left side. So unless the spear has Spider-Man powers and just adheres to his neck, this should not happen. But oh well. I actually think in terms of storytelling, this is a fantastic scene. It's very well done. It conveys a lot in this scene without saying anything, and it's a cool looking fight scene if you're not as pedantic as I am. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people liked it. So there are plenty of good things to say about it, but of course I'm going to focus on the negative because that's much more fun, right? All right, so spears. I don't have anything of this size. This is a full-size spear that you would definitely want to use with 2 hands, and I'll show you why. So if my opponent is trying to control my spear, finding it, push, okay. It's pretty easy for me to hold against it. Now, if I hold the same spear with one hand, this is not happening because now the leverage is working really against me, and I'm gonna have to change my grip quite a bit further forward, which means I lose the vast majority of the reach I would otherwise have. So if I hold it like this, I try to hold against this, just absolutely not happening. With a sword, this is the case too. If I try to prevent it from being moved, I can't because the leverage is working against me, which is why binding and winding works in such a way that you have to control your opponent's upper third of the blade with your lower third, ideally. But this is even worse because at least here the balance works in my favor because most of the mass is in the rear. So this is not pulling me down a whole lot. With a spear, even a shorter one, it's working quite a bit against me because I've got all this load here at the end of the lever that's pulling me down to begin with, and then the opponent wants to nudge it too, and there's nothing at all I can do about it. Not nothing, we'll get to that in a moment. Now, on historical battlefields, spear and shield was very, very common. And reason for that is mainly not so much because it's so great to use a spear with one hand, but more because the shield is so useful, and spears are so cheap that you can easily supply an entire army with it, no problem. Also, if I combine the two, it's less of a problem because now I have some contact here with the shield, so I can resist against that a little bit better than if it's just free hanging like this. So, plus, of course, if this is getting controlled, I have the shield to respond to the threat. Just gonna have to use these as spear substitutes. So if I want to dual wield spears, I have a bunch of problems. One is my hands are completely and utterly exposed. There's nothing saving me here at all. There's no guard, there's no protection in any way. Plus, I'm gonna have to catch it pretty low. Because as said, the leverage here works against me. If I try to catch a sword cut just like this on the end, it's just gonna blow right through and cut me anyway. So I'm just gonna have to catch it pretty low here, which means that my hands are terribly exposed and there's nothing helping me out here. No shield, no buckler, nothing. Okay, next problem. If I thrust, okay, a lot of the time my opponent's response is just kind of wipe it aside. The better response is to bind and counter thrust. But either way, if this happens, they've already got this spear under control. The only thing I can do really is try to pull it back and thrust again. I have the other one, okay, all fair and good. So I could do this and then this, right? That's if the opponent doesn't know how to handle it. If I'm dealing with dual spear, so whichever the opponent thrusts with, I'm gonna have to displace it toward the other spear, because this is what happens here. Try to stab me with one and then the other. Crossed, boom, done. I want to combine the two. And as soon as I do, and particularly if this was a two-handed sword, I'm just gonna have a little bit more strength here to work with. So if the other side thrusts first, and now the second spear is trying to get somewhere, even if you try to deliberately go for my opening, try to thrust low, it's fine, because what I want is this. This right here. Boom, dead. As soon as I cross, I'm good. This doesn't matter if it's one or two. It's basically the same as if it was one, except it's worse because those two are gonna get in the way of one another. Two long weapons like this are really cumbersome. If it was two sticks, so if you imagine both of them ending about here, right on my hand, yeah, then I can do, fight with two sticks, no problem. But because I've got to deal with all this crap getting in the way, this hitting my body, hitting the other spear, blah, this and blah, that, this is pretty tricky. Just this alone. Like I thrust, now I'm already pointing at myself with the shaft, so I'm gonna have to constantly work around this. Sure, there are ways you can try to coordinate it, and like the opponent attacks, you swipe it away like this and thrust at the same time. This is something that a shield does better. Anything you can do here, pretty much a shield does better, other than offense in the sense of you have so much more reach, and of course it's going to do more damage. So if I'm dealing with a smaller spear like this, and I want to prevent the opponent from just being able to control it any way they want, there's one thing I can do, which is couch it. So I tuck it under my arm, and now if the opponent tries to control it, I can hold against it with my body, because now if I turn my hips, this actually is a lot more rigid, and I can resist, way better resist and control. The only problem is this is not as versatile, because basically all I can do from here is thrust, and I can kind of try to awkwardly cut, which is for the most part not really going to be effective, because edge alignment is going to be difficult. If for some unfathomable reason you insist on dual wielding spears instead of using one spear with both hands, which is just that much more effective, yes, the best thing I can imagine is if you couch one of them, like the offhand spear maybe, and use this mainly for defense, and use the other one in a different position. You can try to displace the opponent's weapon or bind it and control it, things like that. Meanwhile, you have the other one available. Whether you want to use it like this or like this, I think it makes sense to have another angle, because this is just going to be, from a downward angle. You're going to be limited as to what you can do. You basically, you thrust forward or upward, that's it. So if with the other one you're able to thrust downward, you have some extra options. So I still don't like this. This is still way worse than spear and shield, and definitely worse than spear in two hands. But at least it's not a complete disaster, I suppose. Personally, I would say if you want to do this, just start out like that, throw one spear, and just grab the other with both hands and use it properly. It's just gonna make a lot more sense. So yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good one, folks.